strategic leadership in a changing economy. Few institutions play as quiet and steady a role in our daily lives as the Federal Reserve, and few leaders bring the combination of experience, humility, and purpose that our next guest embodies. We are truly fortunate to have here today Beth Hammack. Beth has spent her career at the highest levels of finance, and since becoming president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, she has been a tireless advocate for understanding how national economic trends play out in the lives of real people. I'm excited for the opportunity to hear directly from one of the nation's most thoughtful and economic leaders, and to learn how the work done here in our region shapes policy at the national level. Please join me in welcoming President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, Beth Hammack, and moderating today's conversation, Managing Partner of the Columbus office of BakerHostetler, Mark Hatcher.
If you didn't tell, we were so cool we didn't need walkout music.
Also, that's because this is being live streamed,
Yes.
and they didn't want to have copyright issues.
There you go. So, thank you. First and foremost, thank you all for being here. Big thank you to Pat for being able to pull this together and have such a dynamic speaker and the opportunity to speak with someone like Beth. So, just starting off, everybody's got your bio. We read, your trajectory, but talk just for a second a little bit about your background and something in there with respect to leadership, right? What's your perspective on leadership in governing, managing organizations?
Yeah, well, so thank you so much. It's great to be here. We've had a lot of good trips to Columbus since I've joined the Cleveland Fed. And if you don't know, we cover all of Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Kentucky, and just the very northern panhandle of West Virginia. But Ohio is really a big part of what we do. I come here having spent 30 years in the private sector living in New York. My husband did grow up in Northeast Ohio. He was a Shaker native, and so we're back with his side of the family, which is great to be. For me, leadership is really about listening. It's about connecting with people and understanding their perspectives. It's about motivating and inspiring them to deliver excellence and greatness every day.
Awesome. Well, we are here at The Ohio State University, a beacon of education across the country. And everyone might not know and understand what the Fed is and how it operates. So can you give us a bit of a primer, Econ 101, on the Federal Reserve and how it impacts our economy?
Sure. And so I will say, when people think of the Federal Reserve, they think of monetary policy. And that is certainly a big part of the job. But our monetary policy meetings are 8 times a year. They last for about 2 days. So that's 16 days. So as you will all know, there's an awful lot of days in the year that we have to fill with other things. And we do a lot of other things at the Federal Reserve. So we have 5 main functions. And one of the things that surprised me most in coming to the Fed was how little people, even on Wall Street, who you would think know everything about the Federal Reserve, really know about what we do day in, day out. So our 5 functions, if we start with monetary policy as number 1. Number 2 is financial stability, which was really the reason for our creation in 1913. The US had undergone a number of bank panics. The most recent before that was the panic of 1907. And so the Federal Reserve was created to ensure that we had a safe and sound financial system. So now what we do is we look around to see where are emerging trends, where are things working well, where might there be vulnerabilities, and in the case where things are not working as well as they should in markets, think the pandemic in 2020 or banking stress in 2023, we can put in place facilities to help smooth over those instances. Our third function is we supervise and regulate the banks. So regulation is determined by the board in Washington, D.C., but we have a team of just over 200 supervisors who spend their time out with the financial institutions across the 4th District, across that region that I talked about, ensuring that you have confidence in the banking system and that the banks are operating as they should, because a strong banking system is the foundation of a strong economy. Our 4th responsibility is consumer protection and community development. So looking at different organizations, understanding how are people getting into the workforce, how are people able to afford housing, how are small businesses faring. So connecting with nonprofit partners and understanding what that means. And then our fifth function is that we are the bank for banks, and we run the nation's payment system. So whether that's the FedWire, again, that's why it's called Fed, we're operating that. Whether it's asking as Treasury's fiscal agent, so in Cleveland, we host a website called pay.gov, which if you happen to go to a national park and swipe your credit card, that's being processed in Cleveland. Or if you're renewing your passport online, we're managing those payments. But it's to things as everyday as those paper bills in your wallet that some people think of as cash, and we call Federal Reserve notes. We have 28 locations across the country where we are making sure that you can have fit currency in your wallet, because even though cash payments are down, they're still really important, particularly in crises. Think the pandemic, there was a huge need for cash. Or if you think about when there was that huge power outage in Puerto Rico, we flew in extra plane loads of cash to make sure that people could go buy groceries.
Wow. So much more expansive than I guess what people might think.
We're more than just monetary policy, although monetary policy is important.
Sure. So we're here with a room full of executives and business leaders. How does the Fed engage with local businesses, and how does the Fed impact Ohio specifically?
So for me, having a real perspective, what's going on in the economy, is critically important for me to be able to represent this region when I go to Washington, D.C., those 8 times a year, and we talk about policy. So yes, our policy meetings are only 16 days a year, but I spend almost every other day in pursuit of information around what's going on in this local economy, so I can accurately represent how is inflation faring, how are people coping with those issues, what is the employment outlook here, what do we think growth is going to be. I find that by connecting with business leaders, I get a better sense of not just where the economy is today or was a month ago, which the official statistics are excellent at telling us, but it gives me insight into how leaders are weighing those trade-offs in the decisions they're making, which tells me where the economy may be headed.
Yeah.
And so when we're setting monetary policy, we need to think about where we're going to be in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, because as we talk about, monetary policy works with long and variable lags, which means it takes an awful long time to go from our decision to the individual consumer. And so making sure that we're engaging with people across the district is really important.
How do those interactions occur? Are there forums? Are there town hall meetings? How do those one-on-one interactions occur?
Yeah, so there's lots of different forums. We have a board of directors in Cleveland. We also have regional boards at our branch offices in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. We host a number, I think it's 11 business advisory councils around the region, where we're bringing together leaders to get their perspective on what they're seeing. And we collect information in something called the Beige Book, which is a report that every Federal Reserve Bank puts out on the same cycle as our FOMC meetings. And so if you are not a Beige Book contributor, you should definitely become one. And if you are, thank you so much, because that's really critical insights. We in Cleveland have turned our Beige Book narrative into numerical indices, which we post on our website, clevelandfed.org, which anyone can take a look at and get sort of the same up-to-date information as to how the economy is faring as I have.
So when you're thinking about policy in the context of current events, right? I'm sure everyone in this room wakes up every morning, first thing they do is look at current events, look at the news. How are you thinking about policy in the context of the considerable geopolitical instability, fluctuating oil prices, grocery costs, and employment numbers? How is that shaping how you think about policy?
Yeah, so Congress has given us what we call a dual mandate, which means we've got 2 main responsibilities. One is full employment, which means everybody who wants a job can find a job, and the other is stable prices. So I have to really think about what's going on in the world, what's going on in the economy, and how is that going to impact those 2 sides of our mandate. Right now, what I hear when I'm talking to CEOs is a lot of uncertainty about the outlook, the economic environment. And when I hear uncertainty about the economic environment, that translates to me into uncertainty around policy, which means we need to be open-minded about where policy may need to go. Right now, I see an employment market that is right around my estimates of full employment. We've had a 4.3% unemployment rate. It's been this low hire, low fire environment for quite some time. But over the past 6 months, that unemployment rate, which I think of as our best indicator of what the balance of labor is in the economy, has been really stable. And so it's a strange balance, but I feel like we're in a good place of balance. On the other side of our mandate, we've been missing our 2% objective on inflation for the past 5 years. And we've had a series of different shocks, which you'd love to think of as one-off shocks that you could look through. Take the supply chain shocks from the COVID pandemic, take the Russia-Ukraine invasion, take the tariff shock that we had last year, and most recently now the conflict in Iran. All of those individually, as an economist, you'd want to step back and look through and say, well, their time is gonna pass and it's gonna move on. But when we've been missing on our inflation mandate for 5 years, it's really difficult for me to step back and think that that's gonna keep moving on. What I hear when I'm out with businesses is I hear concern that an inflationary mindset is starting to to become entrenched in people's minds. I hear about the pain of inflation when I'm out talking to individuals. People who, we did a roundtable in Cincinnati a few months ago, and people said they've got this $400 emergency fund, and it used to be able to pay to fix their car or fix their air conditioning when that went out, and now those expenses are $600 or $700. Right. If you look at, because we've been missing on the inflation side of our mandate, the actual inflation we've had over the past 5 years is equivalent to what we would have experienced if inflation had been 2% over 10 years. Sure. And so what that means is that if you spend $100 at the grocery store, or if you used to spend $100 at the grocery store, it's now costing $120 instead of it should have cost $110 if we had been maintaining that 2% objective. Sure. So I'm weighing both sides of the mandate, but again, given the level of uncertainty, I need to keep an open mind about what the right next move for policy is to make sure we're hitting both sides of the objective.
Yeah. So there recently been big changes at the Fed. We have a new Fed chair, and there's always conversation about the independence of the Fed in particular. Talk to us about why that independence matters.
So the Fed is independent, but we're also accountable. Sure. And that's really something that goes hand in hand. And that's the reason why this conversation, or this part of the conversation, is being live streamed, because we try to make sure that there's full transparency around what we're doing, how we're thinking, and how we'll make decisions in the future. We need to be independent so that we can set monetary policy without regard to short-term political pressures. We want to think about performance over the medium and longer term and make sure that we are driving the economy to those two objectives as set by Congress, so that the benefit of the American public can have in a strong and resilient economy. But we're accountable. And what that means is that the chair of the Federal Reserve testifies in front of Congress, and we try to ensure that there is good transparency around all of our decisions and how we're thinking about things. We release all of our meeting transcripts on a 5-year lag, so if you can't sleep at night, you can read what we talked about, all 250 pages of it, 5 years later. And we put a wealth of data and information out there to make sure that businesses can anticipate where we're going, because planning for the future is really a critical part of leading and running a business. And understanding how the Fed might respond in different situations will hopefully give businesses more clarity on how they should be operating.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. We're here amongst leaders and talking about leadership, and you've had a very dynamic career. Talk a little bit about what inspired you to go into this area of economic leadership, and how your early experiences shaped how you approach your role in leading the Federal Reserve.
So when I was working in finance, I had the privilege of serving on a couple of committees for various government bodies. So I served as chair of the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee for the Treasury Department. I served on a committee for the New York Fed about best practices and market standards. And I got to interact with policymakers through those forums and get their perspective and see how they were thinking about policy. I could bring them a real world, tangible, perspective on how things play out. And for me, the aha moment was in 2019, there was this really wonky thing that the bankers in the room will know, but nobody else should care about, where the Fed had been running down its balance sheet and the repo market went a little bit haywire. And nobody really should know what the repo market is unless you're deep in finance. I happened to be deep in the repo market at that time. And I had the opportunity to go down and talk to people at the Board of Governors they wanted to understand how could the market move 500 basis points and banks weren't stepping in to take advantage. We've got all these efficient market theories and people see arbitrage opportunities. They should be helping to, make sure those go away. And I had to explain, well, when you're sitting on a trading desk and you see that 500 basis point opportunity, you first have to get your boss's approval, then you have to get this approval, then the treasurer has to run all these optimizations. So I tried to explain the frictions of what was happening in real world inside, and it became clear to me through that there were very few people who actually had that practical experience and understood how the theory and the practice could come together. And so for me, that was the moment where I said, you know what, that could be kind of a cool thing to do down the road. That might be something in my next life. So I resigned from my prior job in 2024. I was ready for a new opportunity and was just very blessed that this opportunity opened up in Northeast Ohio, which is where my husband is from. And so we spent 30 years with my family in New York. We get to spend the next 30 with his in Cleveland.
That's outstanding. Well, and this fall, we have to get her to an OSU game. She says she's never been to one, so we got to get her indoctrinated, of course.
I've got the hat. I'm ready to go.
One final question before we transition. Looking at the 4th District, in particular Ohio, and you got these Ohio business leaders in this room, we're often thinking about how to leverage the unique position Ohio is in. What economic strengths do you see that Ohio could take advantage of in the coming years?
Yeah, there are a number of things, and it was great to hear this morning about so many of the things that are going on here. I did not realize that Ohio was the 6th largest economy in the world, but I'm gonna steal that and use that because I love that. One of the things that that attracted me to the 4th District, in addition to the family connections, is that we are really a microcosm of the country. Yeah. We have representation from all the major industries here. We are the 2nd most manufacturing dense district of the 12 Federal Reserve districts. We're going through that transition from manufacturing to services. There's phenomenal innovation that's happening around the district. We're right at the center of what's happening with AI, with data centers, with the workforce transformation. We've got rural economies, we've got energy production. So we've got a little bit of everything that goes on across the US is happening here. What I find most impressive about the region is whether I'm in Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, Toledo, Worcester, wherever I may be across the state, what I see is real connectivity and partnership between the businesses and the nonprofit sector and the official sector and the public sector, working together to solve problems. The thing I love most when people ask me about Cleveland and how do you think about Cleveland and what makes it special is I always give this anecdote, and I know Nick Burlage can't be here today, but one of the things that to me is why I love Ohio is if you go to a Cleveland Cavs game, and we go to a lot, and so hopefully they'll do well tonight, if you go to a Cavs game and there's anyone who comes back from that 2016 championship team into the arena, they're invariably on the opposite side team playing against us. But the Cavs put up a montage video for the player who's returning. So whether it's Kevin Love or LeBron or whoever it might be, and the whole arena stands up and gives them a standing ovation. Now, if that happened in Madison Square Garden, New York, there would be eggs and tomatoes getting thrown at it. But here, we really appreciate our history. We appreciate success. We appreciate excellence. And we want people to come back, and we want to remember them and recognize them for it. So to me, that's one of the things that I really love about the region.
That's awesome. Well, Ohio's a special place, and we won't talk. I'm a Detroit Pistons fan, so we'll have to agree to disagree on that one. But please join me in thanking Beth Hammack for being here with us today. Thank you. It's been great getting to know you and hearing from you.